Hello, everyone, and welcome back to the Board Gaming Doctor. My name is Phil, and I'll be your board game doctor today. In this video, I'm going to give you my first impressions of Shackleton Base. This game has been on my radar for a while, since Essen last year. If I remember correctly, this was on my anticipated list, the short list that I provided in a video back then. And so I'm very excited to have demoed this on Tabletop Simulator. I did play it solo, and so my point of view will come from that. And so let's get into it, talking about the mechanisms first and what stood out to me. So as a quick overview, in this game, you are taking in total 18 actions, placing astronauts that are different colored workers, essentially, doing various things such as gaining resources on the base in this crater of the moon in which you are building up a base. You can take resources from there. You can build structures onto the crater itself with your own faction, essentially. You can take these command actions that are kind of a free-for-all or kind of a wild resource type of situation where as you progress through the game, you can use these command actions or corporation actions to gain a lot of different resources. And then finally, you are interacting with 3 of the 7 modular corporations that each play a little bit differently. They bend some rules. They have different requirements that you're trying to fulfill. Each corporation has their own cards that you can acquire for asymmetric abilities throughout the game. And a lot of these corporation actions that you can take have to do with them as well. And like I said, after 18 turns, after 18 bits of placement with your workers, the game ends and whoever has the most points wins. So breaking down some of these mechanisms and what is my favorite amongst them, I really enjoy, first of all, the flexibility of these said corporation actions. What you can do as you build out onto the moon is you start to not only place your own buildings, which is pretty normal for a Euro-style game, but you can also take certain actions to place down corporation tokens on the board. And when you do interact with them, whether you are exploiting the crater, and we'll talk about that in a moment, but also when you take other different types of actions as well. The way that you can place them on the board, and I guess this does incorporate the fact that, how you build out your different buildings onto the crater, create opportunities for you to exploit the resources more efficiently, or at least for hopefully for free, but without much payment to other people, because if you do try to exploit the crater, in which you place a worker down, and in the line of view, the line of sight from that worker, you interact with the different sectors of the board according to what type of worker you place. And so if you do have buildings in that line of sight, that allows you to gain the resources from each of those sectors in which you have influence. And so there's a lot of thought that goes into where you place your buildings and in which row you activate. It's almost kind of like an engine building type of experience where you want to hopefully align yourself in a way to take advantage of the basic resources that you use to build buildings with and to pay for things that the corporations ask for, right? The titanium and the rare earth metals. But you also get to try to align yourself with these corporation tokens to interact with them as well. And so there's a lot of interaction, especially I can imagine in a higher player count, with where you place these buildings and where you place your workers to take advantage of the board state for resources and opportunities. So that aspect is pretty interesting. The worker placement itself on the corporate board, which is in the bottom right of the board, is pretty basic but interesting as well, where if you align yourself or you place a worker in a certain row first, it is the cheapest. It's free essentially to take that action, and they get more expensive as more and more people place workers on that certain row. And so there's a lot of opportunity for interaction and taking advantage of cheaper actions earlier on. And the I guess the tough decision is whether to take that efficiency earlier on or to wait and take that action perhaps later when it might benefit you more, but it might be more costly since someone else goes there and places a worker in front. Finally, I guess two more things that stood out to me is that there is an income phase, but in addition to this income phase is a is it a mechanics phase or upkeep essentially, and so maintenance phase is the word I'm looking for. And so in this maintenance phase, you have to pay money based off of the progress that you've made in the game. You pay maintenance to upkeep the buildings that you've placed onto the crater, as well as pay a maintenance cost the higher you go on your reputation, up the reputation track. And so, the better you are, the more expensive it gets. And so it's kind of a feed your worker type of scenario. And I'll get into some game comparisons later, but I did enjoy that aspect to always, in the back of my mind, remind myself to make sure that I have enough to, work with credit-wise, money-wise, to maintain what I am trying to do in this game. And then last but not least, of course, the modular corporations. They allow for different goals to be pursued every game. You mix and match 3 of the 7. Some of them are more difficult than others. And while I did demo the somewhat easier corporations, of course, I think this allows for inherent replayability and variability from game to game and how they interact. More on my thoughts later on what these modules contribute to the game, but a large part of this game is interacting with these modules. They don't feel tacked on. They do feel pretty integral with the game. Now to get into some game comparisons, the first one that I want to compare this to is SETI. So SETI is a game that has been compared to this quite often. These came out around the same time, and so I can't say one, copied the other in terms of theme or what have you. But the similarity that they share is that they both have modules that are added from game to game to add some different flavor from, in between repetitions. SETI obviously has a more of a reveal mid-game type of experience, whereas with Shackleton Base, they are present from the beginning. I feel like the differences between the two are, I feel like perhaps the modules from Shackleton Base shake up the base game a little bit more. I feel like you are still interacting with the ones in SETI in addition to doing what you're normally doing, but I feel like there's more of an endgame push towards the modules in Shackleton Base, where a lot of the points are offered based off of the goals of these modules, and so you do want to pursue them. Whereas in SETI, I feel like you could pursue the modules and the points that they might give you, but there are other ways that you can interact with the game, the base game, meaning the game without the aliens. You do have to play with aliens in the game, but you could continue to search planets and explore, etc., scan, and still get enough points and go for the milestones and points that are offered there, rather than just focusing on an alien module or two. And so I feel like that's the biggest difference between the two, but each game, in addition to obviously the space type of theme, offers the variability in terms of different experiences and modules, which is quite fun. Another game that I want to compare this to is actually my Rosenberg pick, and that's going to be Agricola. So anytime I get to compare a game to Agricola, I feel like that is a win. And so we'll see how that compares in the final ratings later. But the main way that I compare these two games is one, I didn't mention this in the overview, but you do get to draft workers at the beginning of the game, or I should say at the beginning of every round. And So there's an opportunity to kind of draft what you are trying to plan to do from round to round. It's similar to the draft that you have of the cards in Agricola. Not to the same extent, of course, because Agricola, you're planning over the whole game versus the particular round in Shackleton Base. But the two things, one, the feeding mechanism in Agricola feels somewhat similar to the maintenance phase in Shackleton Base, once again offering you that reminder from round to round that you do need to have enough credits, or at least discounts, available to be able to maintain your corporation, your lab, your research station, whatever it's called. And so I believe you lose reputation if you're not able to meet it, and so it feels like begging, right, in Agricola. And so I really enjoy games that offer the constraint, whether it's like a really tight constraint or not, the constraint of trying to achieve points and your goals, interacting with the modules, etc., but also trying to remember to feed your workers, right, to maintain your stations and make sure everything is up and running. And so that kind of adds a little bit of flavor and theme to this Euro game that I appreciate. And the other thing that reminds me of Agricola is the timing. Both games are primarily driven by worker placement, and you could argue that in Agricola you're going to achieve the same thing, every game, right? You're always looking to build a room and then add more family members and then build out your farm from there. Some people say that might be scripted, but how and when you accomplish that is part of the fun of the game. Obviously, with the cards that you get, the strategy and the efficiencies can be different from game to game, but I feel like the timing of when you want to try to gather certain resources or to build certain things, play certain cards, makes Agricola feel different. And in Shackleton Base, I get the same feeling of timing. You do want to try to accomplish everything that you want to in the game. You want to build out as many stations that you can onto the board. You want to interact with the corporations as much as you can as well. And I feel like, especially at a lower player count, you have the opportunity to do so. But once again, coming back to the efficiencies and the command center, which is the 3 rows in which you take the major actions, right? You can either build out onto the board, you can acquire the cards, which give you your abilities, or you can take the command action or corporation action to mix and match some of the resources and benefits that you get. The earlier that you can play on those rows, the better and the cheaper it is. And so you're often, once again, faced with the decision whether to pursue those actions first while it's still cheap before someone else goes and takes the cheaper spots of those rows, forcing you to spend those credits, which you can use to maintain yourself as well as build out structures, versus using them now to pay for an action that might benefit you now, but maybe you won't have enough money to maintain later. And so there's a very tough decision in the timing in which you play these workers that you've sort of drafted from the shuttle phase at the beginning of the round. So I really appreciated that and thought that was a lot of fun. Then added some of the tension that I like to see in these Euro games. So moving on to the peer review, where I compile through AI a lot of the comments that people made on Board Game Geek in regards to Shackleton Base. Starting with the pros, this game was praised by a lot of people in terms of the good blend of worker placement and area control, resource management, all those good things that you would find in a Euro game. The area control aspect in particular is interesting because of the resource management, or I guess the resource opportunity that I mentioned before in the line of sight worker placement on the central board. There's an element of that, as well as acquiring workers to place onto your board. And if you have the majority essentially in a certain row, if a worker is placed there, you can put it into your own board, which gives you some benefits throughout the game. A lot of people obviously enjoy the variability amongst the modules to make every game feel a little different. The game itself, is relatively quick on paper, with 18 rounds total. Something that I didn't mention in the game comparisons before is one of the designers, Fabio Lopiano. He has designed games such as Autobahn, but one game that comes in mind is Zapotec, which I played and reviewed a couple of years ago. It felt very similar to that, and I feel like Merv and Zapotec are games where Lopiano is trying to create a interesting and crunchy Euro in a shorter playtime, essentially. And so this game really has a lot of his DNA in that, and I think that's what people appreciate from his designs. Games that do feel quicker, relatively quicker compared to your average Euro game, and so every decision really counts. A lot of people really enjoy the components. The game is relatively straightforward once the rules are learned, etc. Now, some people had mixed feelings about the interaction in this game. Obviously, at higher player counts, you have a lot more interaction to the command center actions that you take for your workers, the central creator as well, the line of sight type of actions, those have a lot of interaction at higher player counts as well. It's not so much at lower player counts. It feels a lot more flexible and open to take those actions. And then for some of the criticisms that people had, this game doesn't feel very innovative. It's using a lot of different mechanisms that perhaps are seen in past games of Lopiano's, but also in Euro games in general. It's kind of fiddly in the sense of, or procedural, I should say, where the game very, very much follows a multi-step process, and so, it could feel a little janky, I guess, from here to there. When you go from the shuttle phase to the round phase to the maintenance phase, I guess it could be kind of fiddly, at first. When you are learning this game, it's not as intuitive as some other games are when it comes to like thematic integration and how the theme explains the rules. I think, well, I'll leave that for my final thoughts, but yeah, there's high opportunities or risks, I should say, for analysis paralysis. It could feel punishing if you're a new player playing this game as well, not knowing the efficiencies and what to pursue at first. Once again, coming back to the timing aspect that you see in games like Agricola, if you're not familiar with the game and the unwritten script as to what to do next, it could be difficult to keep up with your competitors throughout the rest of the game. And then finally, some people had some issues with a long teaching time, despite the fact that it is relatively straightforward to understand once you do understand the rules and play the game once or twice. It's hard to get over that hurdle at first for some. So for my first impressions, I'm giving this game a 7.2 out of 10. I really enjoyed playing this game. It was really hard for me to come to really understand the game and enjoy it as I was playing it. I think it's twofold. One is the solo mode itself, and I'll talk about my experience with it. I felt like it was pretty straightforward once you understood it. I feel like there was an added learning curve to not only learning the game and how it works normally for yourself, but also to manage the solo bot, right? The AI or computer player, right? The way that the cards worked, I felt like there wasn't enough iconography to really tell you exactly how to utilize the actions differently for the AI. There was a lot of referencing the rulebook. I did have some issues myself with the rulebook as well. I felt like it wasn't as clear to me exactly what would happen, and I felt like even if I wasn't missing rules, I felt like I was missing rules during my first play. And I think that ultimately ties in, and so that was my experience with the solo mode, but also with the game in general. Learning from primarily the rulebook, I just felt like there are so many rules within rules and little exceptions or reminders that the rulebook explains when you take certain actions, which feels good when you're pulling off these turns on the board, itself, and being able to do what you need to do and combo a little bit. But I felt like I would forget little things here and there and forget those opportunities to take combos. For example, the solar panels that you can purchase. I felt like that was a good example for me that kind of felt like a roadblock in my understanding of the game, where the different buildings that you put onto the creator need to be fueled by a solar panel. I think it's really cool that you, on your turn, when you do any sort of action, you can spend a resource to get a solar panel and put it in the middle of the board for anyone to use, including yourself. And so there's some positive interaction there, and you gain benefits if someone, if you use one, and you gain reputation and energy, etc. But I would forget that was an option sometimes when I was building, and I think this game would have really benefited from a dedicated player aid. There were some icons and great aids on the board itself, but I just felt like it was difficult to remember everything as I was playing the game. Always referencing the rulebook for the solo component and what certain actions meant, but then also referring to the rulebook over and over again during my play for what I could do personally. But and so I felt like it took a lot longer to get to that point of comfort as I was playing the game. But once I started playing it, I had fun. I thought, in addition to the mechanisms that I mentioned before, I really enjoy how quick this game is, how tight every decision is as well. I appreciate the variability that is offered through the different corporations. This game, I feel like, has a lot of potential to provide for that Agricola type of experience where you really could replay this game and master what is going on in the game. I do feel, however, that despite the corporations themselves having a lot of variability amongst each other, I feel like they don't interact with each other in really interesting ways that make the game feel very different from game to game. And this is in comparison with Agricola, where every hand that you draft or dealt with at the beginning of the game can really dictate the arc that your game takes. And it makes for a wildly different experience every time in the different ways that the cards interact with each other. I don't get that same sort of vibe when I play Shackleton base. I do feel like the corporations act very interestingly one with another, but ultimately, I don't feel like you're doing as many crazy things to interact with them, or as a result of interacting with them. I feel like they are just a part of the natural process of this game. You're just trying to be as efficient as you can, and I don't think it would take terribly long to become a quote-unquote master or expert of this game. I feel like you could really understand the different corporations pretty well, and feel very comfortable playing at a high level of play. But I think the journey would still take some time, and it would be fun. That's why I give it an 8 out of 10 for the skill ceiling component, or how competitive this game is. I feel like it would still take maybe about 20 or so games to really feel comfortable in and start to really progress in your skill level. But yeah, everything else just was really solid. I think this is a really good game. In my opinion, I think this is Lopiano's best game. I know Nestor Mangone has a lot of different games as well with a bunch of other designers, and so I can't really comment on him, but I know I have played Merv, I've played Zapotec by Lopiano, I've played Autobahn as well. I've always been interested in his designs, and I think this one has the potential to be his best in conjunction with everyone else involved with this team. I think the gameplay is quite good, and it just takes a little bit of extra time. It doesn't feel as streamlined as other games are. Once again, comparing this to SETI, I found SETI a lot easier to understand. One, in part due to the approach to gameplay. It borrows a lot from games that I enjoy and a lot of people enjoy, like Ark Nova, Lost Ruins of Arnak, etc. And so approaching that game mechanically is a lot easier, in my opinion, to understand. But then you know, every card in that game really has a flavor, and what it tries to accomplish, I feel like, is met mechanically throughout the game. And so there's a really good thematic connection between the two. And so while I feel like the modules in Shackleton Base offer a lot of that thematic integration, I did give it a somewhat high score, but it isn't as thematic as some of these other games are, which is of somewhat importance to me. And I feel like that's what would help me really, I guess, play a game like set in space, right? Like a real game set in space, like Terraforming Mars or SETI, etc. I feel like those games hit different for me thematically as well as mechanically. But Shackleton Base, I think, is a really good game. I think it deserves all the praise that it's gotten. I don't think it's going to quite fit my, I guess, my desire to really understand and play this game at a higher capacity and level. But I would enjoy playing this game more to, one, to see the different modules that I haven't played with, but two, to experience it at a higher player count to see how different this game feels, from game to game. So those are my thoughts on Shackleton Base. Let me know what you think of this game, and thank you for consulting with me today. Hope you schedule an appointment with me real soon, and I'll catch you on the next one. Take care.